Hello everyone, this is Marco and welcome back to my channel. Today I'll be doing an in-depth review of the brand new Hammond collection CARNOTAURUS by Mattel. Keep in mind that this review is from a sculptor's and model designer's point of view. I hope you enjoy the review and let's have a look at the box. So the packaging is pretty much identical to what we see with any other Hammond collection release. It's generally black or dark grey with a window to show the figure itself. A nice spot UV glossy Jurassic logo right there on the top. On the sides we have some renders of the figure, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom logo, and on the back we have a photoshopped version of the figure itself with some information and some upcoming releases. This is the debut of a brand new size category in the line, as this figure is somewhere in between the medium-sized figures like the Ceratosaurus and the large size like the Tyrannosaurus Rex. So let's open up this box and assemble the figure. The tail comes separate, and once every single part is freed, we click the tail into place. Okay, so here's the CARNOTAURUS out of the box in all its glory, and straight away you can tell that this is the best Hammond collection figure that Mattel has ever released. This is due to a number of facts, which is the overall body proportions are pretty much perfect, the sculpt detail is exquisite, the articulation's been reworked, there are some flaws which I will talk about, but overall it's really good, and the paintwork is really nice too. So before we have a really good close look at this, I'd like to point out that Mattel seems to have a real soft spot for the CARNOTAURUS. Because every single release that they have done of this dinosaur, they seem to nail it every time. Like, they put a lot of effort into the sculpt and paintwork of this thing. So I think one of the designers at Mattel is clearly a huge fan of it. We'll have a quick look at the other CARNOTAURUS released by Mattel. Just as a really quick comparison, this is the first CARNOTAURUS they released from the Fallen Kingdom line, and as you can tell, the sculpt on this thing is gorgeous. One of the best ones they've ever done, including the paintwork and everything. Obviously this Hammond collection one is a step above, as you would expect from a premium collector's line, but this is one of the best CARNOTAURUS figures ever released for a Jurassic line. The same goes for this, the Control and Conquer CARNOTAURUS. As you can see, the sculpt is pretty much the same. There's a few changes in the head and a bit on the proportions. But again, this is a really solid figure. It looks lovely. And that paintwork is probably my favorite one on any Mattel figure. I love the sort of airbrushed patterns going on this. And you can clearly tell that they kind of replicated that look on this one too. It's a bit more subtle on this one. I really like it. But going back to the start of this video, let's talk about the proportions. Now, the proportions are really good, as I said earlier. They mentioned in the Beyond the Gates video, the designers at Mattel got in contact with ILM, the artist that designed the CARNOTAURUS for the films. And they pretty much used that CGI model as reference. They put a lot of effort into replicating that. So if we use the Dinosaur Style Guide as reference and find the CARNOTAURUS, there it is. This is the newer model that was added to Jurassic World Evolution 2 and reworked a bit by Lukey. I think that model was the actual ILM one, but slightly reworked for the game. So this is as close as you can get. And as you can see, the tail is nice and long, just like in the reference picture. The feet are smaller than previous Hammond collection releases. The only thing maybe that is a bit of a problem in some people's eyes is the size of the arms. Those are a little bit oversized, but that's to accommodate articulation. Again, Mattel goes out of their way to tweak and change the accuracy of a sculpt to incorporate articulation, which isn't really the way you're supposed to do it, especially on a collector's line. You can download the Dinosaur Style Guide for free for your own artistic projects. I'll put the link in the description. So that was a general look at the CARNOTAURUS, and let's get more in detail. That head sculpt is clearly based on what we see in the film. It is pretty much identical. The sculptors at Mattel did an excellent job with this. Absolutely stellar, with exquisite detail all around. And if we open the mouth, they actually redesigned the way they do the teeth And these look much smaller and less goofy than previous releases from the Hammond collection as well as the main line. These teeth are smaller and look sharper too. And they're actually cast in a different material from the rest of the figure. Because this is a different cast material, they can actually make it a little bit sharp because it's rubbery, so it's a bit safer than normal sort of hard plastic. And it makes the whole look of the teeth a lot crisper because they are not painted, they're pigmented. So it looks really, really, really neat. And this is a new thing that Mattel's doing with their Hammond collection figures. And I am so happy about this. I think they started doing that with the Metricanthrosaurus and the Irritator that they released for the Hammond collection. Let me grab those real quick. There we go. The teeth here are a separate piece from the rest of the face and the mouth. And this is one of the first instances we see this on the Hammond collection line. And this is where this new technique really shines because the teeth are really, really small and sharp looking, instead of the really sort of thick and goofy ones that we see on the Baryonyx and the Ceratosaurus. Here's the Ceratosaurus. As you can see, this is all cast in the same red plastic. There is no seam lines where the teeth are. Instead, they've just been painted. And because this is a bit more of a rigid plastic, they've had to sort of make the teeth much bigger and rounder and bulkier for safety reasons. Mattel loves to sort of go the extra mile and be extra safe by making them super big and super round. I'm guessing so this is just passes all the safety rules and inspections and whatever. But this new version, this new technique really does make things a lot prettier and safer too because they're rubbery and they don't hurt. This is the Baryonyx again for comparison. And yeah, these teeth look kind of ridiculous. Look at how wide these are. I've been asked by a lot of the people in the community to redesign a new head for this guy, so the teeth look a bit nicer as well and the head sculpt a bit more accurate. I'm not sure yet because the Baryonyx is discontinued. I don't want people to spend a lot of money to find a figure to then modify it later. Potentially bring down the value of the figure for collectors, but I might do it for myself, and if people really want it then I might release. We'll see what you guys think. Let me know in the comment section down below. So that was the teeth. Now let's compare the head sculpt with the model that we see in the film. As you can see, the scales are pretty much exactly where they should be, these bigger ones here. The head shape is spot on, even from the front. There is one thing that kind of strikes me as weird, is usually where there is a line here between the top jaw and the bottom jaw. That's where the bottom jaw sort of ends. But as you can see, the bottom jaw sort of slides underneath the top part, and it's not something that is accurate. I don't see why they did that, especially because it makes the top of the jaw look a bit wider than it should be. Because it overlaps the bottom jaw. This is a very minor detail. This figure is still gorgeous regardless. It's just a really sort of odd decision on Mattel's part, which they seem to do a lot. They do a lot of odd decisions. You know, looking at the top of the head, it's full of little ridges and bumps, which is identical to what we see in the film, and it looks lovely. So as you can see, it has a glass eye, or should I say plastic eye, because this is plastic, it's not glass. Again, Mattel sort of is a bit iffy with these. They tend to make them really deep and make the pupil really, really far back into the eye. So there's only very certain specific angles this eye looks good. Most of the time it looks really dark and the pupil isn't even, which makes the figure look really odd and a bit possessed. So I think they kind of need to work on their eyes a little bit. Make the pupil a bit closer to the surface of the eye, not as recessed. Obviously we don't want it on the surface of the eye, otherwise the sort of illusion of it looking at you is broken. But we need something in between. I'll show you my version of the Hammond collection Buck T-Rex, which I designed with Ceratec, and that one has a better example for how the eyes should look. And as you can see, the pupils aren't as recessed or deep back in the eye as the Carnotaurus, and this is actual glass, so it's a lot crisper and there's no distortion on the pupil. A big difference in my opinion. It's just very small details that really add up at the end of the day, I think. Now the neck is very detailed, again, it's very nice. There are a couple of things that could have been improved or changed a little concerning the seam lines and the articulation. Detail wise, it is spot on, it's perfect, just like the head. Maybe there's a tiny bit of softness in the detail here where the joint is, but that's mainly hidden when you pose it anyway, you can't really see it much. It does have these sort of spikes going down, which is accurate to what we see in the film, and some nice wrinkling going on too. However, that part of the neck is quite pointy, it's a bit too pointy actually. They kept one of the spikes right at the edge of the seam line, and it looks weird. If they rounded that off, it would have looked a lot better. About the articulation in the neck, I think I'll talk more about it in the articulation section of this review, so we'll leave it at that. Looking at the body sculpt is really, really nice. Again, we've got these ridges going down, continuing from the top of the neck, going into the body. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's some really major, deep looking wrinkles or lines in the sculpt here to accentuate the musculature. It does have some really crisp little scales going all over the thing, and they're broken up a bit by bigger scales. Usually Mattel seems to soften the detail around the tummy. It's kind of a bit softer here, but it's nowhere as bad as, let's say, the Ceratosaurus. There's barely any detailing going on in the middle of the stomach of the tummy. Especially considering the Ceratosaurus's belly is supposed to have a very similar texture as the belly on the Tyrannosaurus Rex. Whereas everywhere else there's some really deep and detailed scales. But they seem to have resolved that issue a bit on this, and it really does look nice. The arms, again, are a bit too big. The detail on them is really nice. It doesn't have much detail on the hands themselves, which is a bit odd, but it does have some nice wrinkles here around the wrist. It's really buff looking musculature forearms, which isn't accurate because Carnotaurus barely uses its arms, if at all. The one thing that I really like about this sculpt is these wrinkles here. They look really organic and lovely, really nicely done. Now, one thing that the Mattel figures seem to have is some really strange looking ribs poking out from the rib cage. Ribs don't really behave like this. It's like they took a scoring tool and just scored some lines here. It kind of looks a bit like when you go to the butcher and there's the ham that is all taut around with the string and it makes these bumps. It should be the other way round. They should be a bit like curved in a bit. So here's a quick little practical demonstration of what I mean. So the way Mattel seems to have done the ribs is using actually this crease tool. What it does is it creases the material when you use the tool like this, which ends up looking quite angular in this spot here, a bit too sharp looking when it kind of should be a little bit the other way around. I'm exaggerating it a little bit so you can understand. And this is how they should do it. I'm just going to use my normal brush tool and very gently mark where the ribs should go, like this. Then I invert the tool and do the same but where the ribs should go. Then I grab a smooth tool and soften the lines a little bit. So as you can see, it looks more like bones poking out of skin. It's a bit more subtle and not as sharp as what Mattel's done. And only a sculptor can notice this stuff, so it's not really that big of a deal. It's just quite basic stuff for sculptors in general to notice this kind of detail, so it's a bit odd that a highly professional sculptor that works for big companies does this sort of mistake. It's a bit odd, but it doesn't really take away from the figure. It's just nitpicking. If you guys are new to this channel, you should probably know that I am a sculptor and I notice this stuff because it's my job. I've been trained, I studied years and years for this stuff, and I notice stuff like this. But for the general consumer, this is not a problem at all. Now looking at the legs, there's some really deep lines here for the musculature. Maybe a bit too deep, but it looks lovely regardless. There's these scales around again with bigger ones, like in little clusters here and there. Again, the musculature on this figure is super accentuated by these lines. The feet and the toes are very nicely detailed too. And again, the size of the feet are so much better than the massive ones that we saw on the Tyrannosaurus. The dew claw isn't very detailed. It looks a bit soft. On the back here of the body, you can see some really nice deep wrinkles going on there. The tail is divided into two segments, which allow you to pose it better than as if it was just one piece. This one does have wire in it, so you can pose it like that, which is super nice. But again, look at all these wrinkles in the skin there. It doesn't look like elephant skin at all. Usually when you add wrinkles like this, you tend to make it look a bit like elephant or rhino skin, but because of the presence of the scales there, it really does help, and it looks really nice. We've got some more of those spikes going down all the way to the tip of the tail. The tail does seem to be a bit shiny, but that's probably because it's cast on a different material. This is rubbery and this is solid hard plastic. There isn't much detail underneath, but that's where the seam line runs, and because it's rubber, they cut the seam line and it got rid of some detail from there. These holes here are for the wire inside. The wire is held in place by these little plastic parts, and they poke out a little bit, or poke in this case. It doesn't take away from the figure. It looks fine. Now, one thing that Mattel does tend to have a problem with is the width of the thighs. On the Carnotaurus, they nailed it. It's fine. It looks gorgeous and accurate. If we look at it from the top, the width of the thighs and the hips and the torso seems to be just right, which is very different from what Mattel usually does. Let me explain. Well, Mattel usually tends to do some really fat looking bodies from the top. This is a clear example. This is the infant Tyrannosaurus from the Lost World, and those hips are absolutely massive. Let's compare it to the style guide. And then you got the raptors, which take it to a whole other level. Look at that, look at those hips, look at those thighs. And comparing it to my Robosaurs, which I based on the maquettes and stuff and style guide, you can certainly tell that the Mattel Raptors are really thick looking. The Hammond collection Tyrannosaurus also, the adult, also suffered from that problem. So it's nice to see Mattel fixing that problem with this Carnotaurus. I hope this is a new standard going forward for Mattel, because this looks absolutely stunning. So let's talk about the paint job. The paint job overall is really good. We do have a main orange brown color for the body. All of it is cast into that base color. We do have a belly color that runs from the tip of the chin all the way down here to the bum. This is a little bit of a negative because this color should be going all the way down to the tip of the tail, but to reduce cost in manufacturing and material, they tend to just cut it before it should really end. They shouldn't really be doing that on a collector's line. However, I do like how they airbrushed it here and it blends into the base color of the plastic. It looks really natural and organic, and this is the type of stuff that we like. It's really nice. Talking about the airbrushing, all of these darker marks look airbrushed. I don't think it's actually airbrushed. I think it's printed just like everything else. But the fact that they went out of their way to make it look organic like this, where it sort of blends in and it's not a harsh line between these two colors, really does help with the overall look and appeal of this figure. There's some extra coloring right there on the snout. A bit lighter color there, just to break up the colors a little bit and really makes it look organic. Now another thing is the paint should go all the way down the tail here as well. It's another downside. It's not as bad as on other figures, but they really should not be doing this on a collector's line. That's, I think, all the paint I can spot except for the claws. Everything else is pigmented plastic. It's not actual paint applications. The inside of the mouth is pigmented pink. It does have a nice gloss coat to make it look shiny, and that's lovely. Talking about the claws, they're painted with this grey, and it's just these 6 toes that have been painted. There's no paint on the dew claws or on the hands. They do appear to be glossy. I'm not sure if that's a coat of gloss over it or if it's just the way it's been cast. So I think the paintwork could have been done a little bit better. Again, it's Mattel cutting corners a little bit on everything they do, but they really shouldn't do this on a collector's line. Articulation wise, there are some improvements from other Hammond collection releases like the Tyrannosaurus, and there are a couple of really odd downsides to this. Let's start with the good. So the legs have been reworked a bit in terms of how they articulate. Usually what we see is a ratchety sort of posing system, a bit like that, where it sort of clicks into place like that. But that usually happens on every single joint. But this time, they don't. It's all completely smooth on every single joint in the leg, except for the hip. Why did they do that? I'm not sure if it was intentional, but I do like that a lot. I think companies tend to add those ratchety sort of clicky bits in to help them stand. So if, let's say, the joint becomes a bit less stiff over the years and over use, they tend to sort of flop down slowly because the joints aren't stiff enough. By adding a little ratchety click thing in it, I'm not sure what it's called. If it has that, it's less likely to lose its pose when it's standing on a shelf. They do feel a bit tighter than usual, but because these new joints are smooth, you have more range of posability, especially if you're a stop motion animator and you have pretty much unlimited posing possibilities. Another really nice thing that they've done is that they've added a segment in the tail, so it's not just one rubbery piece that can't really be bent here because the rubber's too thick, just like with the Ceratosaurus. This time you can actually pose it like that already and then add the bend here. One thing that people aren't too keen about is how the top jaw and the bottom jaw move together. So they designed this in a way that if you open the bottom or the top jaw, the other moves with it. I'm not too sure why they overcomplicate their designs like this, but it does work. It looks fine. In reality, the top jaw should not move at all. Living animals, top part of the head doesn't move up or down when you open your mouth. It's generally just the bottom jaw. But the way they do that is to emphasize its roaring, I think. But people like to be able to pose it however they want with these two parts individually articulated. The downsides are probably the arms, the neck, and some part of the tail. Mattel's philosophy about collectors' premium figures is that they need to have as much articulation as possible. They seem to think that that's what collectors want. So the more articulation, the better the figure. It's kind of true, but you gotta have to balance it properly with the accuracy of a sculpt. What collectors want is something that looks just like what we see in the film or reference material. Each articulation point is a plus. So about the arms are too big. They made the arms a bit bigger so they could fit the articulation points. But if you look at the film, the arms don't move at all. They're just sort of hanging there like this all the time. Because they're so small, CARNOTAURUS didn't really have much of a use for them. So why would you want to pose these? It just looks a bit odd. If we look at the previous iterations of the CARNOTAURUS from the main line, the arms are just one piece of plastic and they just move forward and backwards and out. And this is a bit more accurate to what we see in the film in terms of range of motion. And as you can see, the arms on this Hammond collection one are just massive. They're really big compared to what they should look like. I know Rod's Random Work is making replacement arms for this guy. So if you want to replace your arms on the CARNOTAURUS and make it look more screen accurate, you can follow him and he'll post updates on that project. Let's talk about the neck. I'm really confused as to why they decided to change the neck articulation from the Tyrannosaurus to this, because it can go up and down and side to side, but it cannot twist at all. It's just not designed to twist. It goes right back, and I feel like it's gonna break if I just keep doing that. I'm not sure why they did that, because even in the film, the the Carnotaurus does twist his head a bit when roaring. So they removed that feature, but they kept it on the tail for some reason. And the tail is not supposed to do that. So why can the tail twist when that does not happen in the film or in reality at all? But they completely got rid of it from the neck. This is so odd. I just can't comprehend that decision. It makes no sense at all. Now the way that was done on the Tyrannosaurus is done really well actually. Let me bring that out. So here's the Tyrannosaurus. As you can see, the head can tilt. So how can it do that? The base of the joint is a perfect circle. As you can see, because it's a perfect circle, it can twist in any direction like this. So my argument usually is, don't make the base of the tail a circle and make it thinner. That way it looks more accurate to what we see in the film. In fact, here on the Tyrannosaur, it just looks odd. The shape of the base of the tail just goes out and it looks really odd. And they changed the accuracy of the sculpt so you're able to twist the tail, which is what they did with the neck. To be able to make the sculpt more accurate, they made the neck thinner and you cannot turn it. It's oval shaped at the base. It is not a circle, but they went the extra step and completely got rid of the ball joints that are inside and turned them into other types of joints. They could have easily fixed this problem by having, first of all, ball joints inside, but also having this section of the neck rubbery would allow it to twist. Just like what they did with the Tyrannosaurus. This part of the neck of the Tyrannosaurus is made of a softer material so you could twist the head. As you can see, I can kind of bend that like that. So it's clearly possible for them to do this because they've done it in the past and it's worked really, really well. So again, it's just such a really odd decision to get rid of that articulation from the neck, which is one of the most articulated part of a dinosaur. But they still kept it on the tail where there's no need for it to even exist. This is quite frustrating as a designer. It makes no sense at all. If they really want to emphasize how articulated these figures are by adding more joints, then they should keep the joints that articulate properly and not change the design. Granted, if they did make this a bit rounder, it would have looked a bit less accurate, but if they had this part as a rubberized part, then they could keep the oval shape, but also you'd be able to twist the head. So these are my main gripes with it, and I think that's pretty much it for this Carnotaurus review. It is a really good figure. It is the best one they've ever done. By far, I would give this a 9 out of 10, or even a 9.5 out of 10 or something like that. The only thing that brings it down a bit is that neck articulation for me. I really want that thing to twist. And a little bit of the paint apps could be upgraded a bit. But the rest is absolutely gorgeous. Well done, Mattel. This is a phenomenal piece to be added in the Jurassic Collectible History book. So if you agree with what I say, good. If you don't agree with what I say, good. Just write it down in the comment section down below. I'm really interested to know what you think, if this is the best Hammond collection figure or not. And what is your favorite Hammond collection figure, and what you would expect Mattel to do in the future. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye!
I would like to give a massive thank you to all of my Patreons. Seriously guys, your support really does mean the world to me, as it helps me do what I love for you. You help me buy materials, and most of all, you give me a helping hand with improving the quality of the content of my videos. Even if it's just a small donation, every little helps.